30 years ago, a young woman was murdered right at those apartments right behind me. Megan Johns was born on January 29th, 1965 in Tallahassee, Florida, to Dr. Donnell Johns and his wife, Rosemary. Now, her father, Dr. Johns, was a very respected and world-renowned speech pathologist. So the family, during the early parts of their lives, lived in a few different places around the country. Eventually, her, along with her brother Brian and the family, would come and settle down here in Irving, Texas. Now, according to an interview with Brian online, their father, Dr. Donnell Johns, had a bit of a drinking problem, and this problem might have kind of worked its way down to both brother and sister, Brian and Megan. Now, Brian got caught up with some stuff and did some time in incarcerated here in Texas, but he would later go on to clean up his act. And Megan, very popular girl, very pretty girl, as you can see. And in the area that the family lived at, well, drugs were readily available. So when Megan was pretty young, 14, 15 years old, she started smoking weed. And oftentimes when you smoke weed, it becomes a gateway drug to more hardcore drugs such as cocaine, which is what she spent a good portion of the 1980s doing, cocaine and drinking. Now, later on, as Megan becomes an adult, she's getting tired of living that life. And one day she just says, you know what? I'm done with this. I want to clean up my act, and I want to be a sober adult. So she makes the decision to enter Narcotics Anonymous. And, you know, I can only imagine that it would be quite difficult at first. You know, a lot of times I hear from former drug addicts that it's not so much the drugs that, you know, you're withdrawing from that's difficult in leaving that lifestyle, but it's the friends that you've made along the way in discovering whatever drug you like. So Megan had been clean for about 5 years or so. Now, at the time, Megan had just moved into these very apartments right here. She got her own apartment, and she worked as a secretary for a brokerage firm not very far from where we're currently at right now. So one day, Megan doesn't show up for work, and it is unlike her to just not show up. That doesn't happen. So one of her coworkers is very concerned. They're trying to call her apartment, call her phone, and she's not answering. So they called the management office, or maybe they possibly came down to try to make way to her apartment because she's not answering the door. She's not answering her phone, and she's not answering the door. So one of the maintenance workers that used to work here, they come to Megan's apartment, which is right there, that very sliding glass door, and he finally makes his way inside. And when they get into this apartment, they find Megan Johns' lifeless body on the floor. By the time Irving homicide detectives came to the scene, they believed that Megan had been dead for a while now. It could have been 12 hours or so. Somebody had came to this apartment. Now, they believe that whoever murdered Megan Johns knew the killer because there was no forced entry into the apartment. And the apartment inside was totally ransacked, and the only thing of value that came up missing was a VCR and a couple pieces of jewelry. It almost appears that detectives feel that whoever committed this crime, they were looking for something in particular. looking for something in particular. So the question remains, who killed Megan Johns? This is one of those cases that there's really not a whole lot of evidence to even talk about. The only physical evidence that the police have is a bloody palm print that was left by the killer. Now they know that this killer is a male because it was a man-sized palm print. Other than that, you did have Megan, who for a while was dating a man who was married that had worked as a stockbroker for the same brokerage where she worked at. Now, she said in passing to a family member or a friend that she was dating this guy, but she didn't see a future in it, probably because he's not going to leave his wife for a woman that he's just having a fling with. That's usually how it ends in those situations. She had no known enemies. She was a very popular girl. I mean, everybody loved her. That's why it's kind of confusing as to who could do such a terrible thing. I mean, you questioned all of the employees where Megan worked at. Her family members were checked out. People that were going to Narcotics Anonymous with her, they were checked out too. And from what I've seen online, there really was not any kind of a viable person of interest, suspect, that would have committed this crime. And, you know, you have 30 years later, and it just becomes one of those cold cases that I often read about where just a little bit of evidence, and it would probably take a person who either would just confess to the crime outright, or maybe somebody who, you know, somebody told them in private that, yeah, I did this crime, and maybe they didn't believe them. Maybe they thought that this guy was just talking and he was drunk. And then maybe 30 years later, your memories jogged and you're saying, well, maybe that guy was telling the truth. Maybe he was. She's buried by herself here in this cemetery. None of her family members are around her. Both her mother and father have passed. And they both died not knowing who killed their daughter. Rest in peace. If you have any information on the person responsible for the murder of Megan Johns, please contact the Irving Police Department, 972-273-1010. 972-273-1010. Lamont at large. Catch up in the next video. Peace out.